Hello and welcome back to the channel. I thought it was probably about time that I did the mid-year freakout tag, a booktube staple, with questions reflecting on how my reading year has been going, books that have stood out to me, etc. So buckle on up. We are going to be discussing my reading year so far. And if you enjoy this video and you're new here, hi, my name is Lillian. I would love to have you subscribe and stick around and talk about books with myself and others. Without further ado, the first question of this tag is best book you've read so far this year. And it's probably, for me, going to be a toss-up between Necessary Trouble Growing Up at Midcentury by Gilpin Faust. This is her memoir. I've talked about it in several videos, so I will try to keep this brief, but it is a wonderfully historically contextual memoir by Dr. Faust, who is a historian, and for me this was a standout just in my level of enjoyment as far as Faust's ability to narrate her own life, narrate the history and the story of her own family, as well as look back with a historian's eye for the wider picture and context of the time that she was growing up in, mid-century, middle of the 20th century, the civil rights movement, her involvement in various aspects of that. Really fascinating, really inspiring, and I very much enjoyed it. The other book that I think I definitely need to mention is Journal of a Solitude by Sarton. Again, I have mentioned this book in several videos, so I will keep it brief, but a published journal kept during a year in a writer's life. What I really appreciated about this is insight into the writing process and the writing life of a writer who is already established. I believe Sarton was in her 50s or 60s when she wrote and eventually published this journal, so she had been at it for decades at this point. And as much as I appreciate getting to read stories of up-and-coming artists who are sort of at the beginning of their journey, which is definitely where I feel like I am at the moment, it was also very comforting and reassuring to get to see into the mind and the life of someone who has been writing for quite a long time, and some of the struggles that they still face, and I guess having that reassurance of I don't have to have it all figured out at the beginning in order to make it as a writer. Next question is best sequel you have read this year, and for me, I was thinking I haven't read that many series, but actually I've read a handful, and one that I definitely wanted to mention is The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes by Sebastion. This is the sequel to The Queer Principles of Kitt, Webb. Both are historical queer romances that I listened to on audiobook that I listened to on audiobook earlier this year and quite enjoyed. Both of them were really fun romps with a satisfying level of depth and context when it came to some of the themes and the time periods that they were set in. But anyway, Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes definitely felt like a very fun follow-up continuation of the antics that were put in motion in the first book. This is, I believe, so far a duology. We are following different characters, main characters, than we did in the first book. I also appreciated how the female protagonist, Marion Hayes, is not a, shall we say, soft, kind of ultra-feminine, sweet, even kind person. It felt sort of like a refreshing take on a female romance heroine. She's someone who has had a child, and while she loves that child, it doesn't necessarily feel incredibly connected to motherhood, to her role as a mother. And actually, during the events of this book, she has left her child in the safe hands of her childhood best friend and his new partner, as she has found herself in a bit of hot water and needs to go on the run. Yeah, overall, I would say I really enjoyed both of these books, but specifically also this as a sequel to the previous book in the series. It felt like a very fresh, nuanced take on a historical romance with definitely some queer elements, because Marion Hayes and her love interest are not straight, even though they are a straight passing couple. Next question is new release that you haven't read yet but want to, and for me this is definitely going to have to be Garden Against Time in Search of a Common Paradise by Olivia Laing. This is Laing's latest release, came out I believe a few weeks ago. I've really enjoyed several of their collections that I have read, and in this one Laing is reportedly ruminating on paradise and its long existed connection with gardens. Quote, "But the story of the garden doesn't always enact larger patterns of privilege and exclusion. It's also a place of rebel outposts and communal dreams. It's a little excerpt from the book description, which definitely caught my eye and made me even more excited to pick up this book, hopefully this year. The next question is most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and when I was looking into this, I came across a book called Body Phobia, The Western Roots of Our Fear of Difference by Dianna E. Anderson, and I will pull up the NetGalley page and read you a few of the details. This is set to be published on September 17th of this year by Broadleaf Books. The title and the description are definitely things that grabbed my attention, and I will read you an excerpt from the book description just so I can do it justice. Quote, Western culture hates the fact that we have bodies, from evangelical culture which insists you are a soul and have a body, to wellness culture that turns your control over your body into a moral test, to transphobic activism that insists any steps taken to change one's body is an immoral act, to the treatment of disabled bodies in a profoundly ableist culture. Fear has led cisgender, white, and able-bodied people to deprioritize the physical experience and prioritize the mind alone, contributing to our alienation from one another, the marginalization of certain kinds of bodies, and harm to us all. Definitely very excited to get my hands on a copy of that once it releases. It is definitely leaning into some of my own, shall we say, interests when it comes to reading, interest in things that I would like to learn more about and better understand for myself as a plus-size person, and I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on a copy. The next question asks what the biggest disappointment so far has been in your reading year, and I suppose I have two answers to this. Prater Violet by Christopher Isherwood. This is one of his earlier novels, and it is a satirical take on the 1930s British film industry. I definitely went in with different expectations based on sort of how it had been sold as far as the book description, but definitely didn't realize that it leaned heavily into the satirical element, and not knowing much about the context that it was satirizing, I think some of it, or a lot of it, went over my head, and it was a disappointment in that regard, but also because I read and loved A Single Man by Isherwood last year, 2 years ago, and have sort of been chasing that high with one of his books ever since, and this was definitely not it for me. The next one that I will mention is a short story collection by Angela Carter, who is one of my favorite authors, but this collection, Fireworks, there were definitely stories that I enjoyed, but there were definitely some duds for me, and I think because of the fact that she has written some of my favorite books, namely The Bloody Chamber, her other short story collection of fairy tale retellings, and I also really enjoyed Nights at the Circus by her, one of her novels. I definitely had higher expectations for this collection, and again, I will say there were parts and bits and stories that I really enjoyed. There were ones that fell sort of on the other end of the spectrum of enjoyment for me, so it was sort of a toss-up and overall a disappointment, I think, in the end. Next question asks, what is the biggest surprise so far this year for you when it comes to reading? And I will have to say Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood, which I think I have mentioned previously in a reading wrap-up. Again, I have been sort of reading through a little bit more of Isherwood's catalog of work, chasing sort of that literary high that I found in A Single Man. And while Goodbye to Berlin, it didn't necessarily give me the exact same literary high. And in fact, in the immediate aftermath of me finishing it, I sort of counted it as fine, but kind of unremarkable. But it has stayed with me in the weeks that I have read it, and I have continued ruminating on, chewing on a lot of its themes, a lot of the structure and the viewpoint that it has. So I think for me, that so far has been the biggest surprise when it's come to my reading year. I feel like that book has definitely risen in my appreciation of it, and while it doesn't necessarily match or beat A Single Man by any means, I definitely, in hindsight, am enjoying it more than I did when I initially read it. Next question is new favorite author or new to you author, and the one that I am going to mention is definitely not a new author, and that is Vladimir Nabokov. I have started to read his first memoir. I don't know if he's published other memoirs, but Speak Now, that's a Taylor Swift album, Lord. Speak Memory by Vladimir Nabokov is a memoir of the first 40 years of his life. I have very slowly been making my way through it, but am at the moment continually just blown away by his writing, his prose, and I can definitely see, if this keeps up, I can definitely see him potentially becoming a new favorite author. Next question, newest fictional crush, and I guess I can mention Alpha the Android from Yokohama Kadaishi Kaiku, which is a manga series. I have the first omnibus bind-up of the first 3 volumes, and it is a collection that I read earlier this year and quite enjoyed. It is a very quiet, sort of semi-philosophical story, I suppose, set in a, not post-dystopia, but the world is not as it used to be. It is sort of a, not downgraded version, but something has happened to where life has had to slow down in the wake of a catastrophic change that has affected the world, and we are following Alpha the android as she runs her seaside coffee shop, interacts with her neighbors and fellow androids, navigates life playing her moon guitar, and in general kind of philosophically searching for her purpose. And my camera battery is flashing at me. Oh lord. Okay. But yeah, I would say, I suppose she is a fictional crush of mine. I definitely have taken a bit of fashion inspiration from her. The story itself, I believe, was written in the late 90s, early 2000s, so the fashion in there definitely reflects that, and I'm enjoying that. Next question is newest favorite character, and I think my answer for this is not quite a character, it's a little bit more ambiguous, but there was a poetry collection that I read this year called Julia Hungry by Hannah Louise Poston. She is number 1 a poet, but number 2 a YouTuber that I follow and really enjoy, talking about makeup, fashion, and aesthetics. She's first and foremost a poet, and this is her first poetry collection that was published, and the premise, I suppose, is playing with and sparring with a lot of the more traditional themes and more, shall we say, widely recognized, acknowledged white male poets of the poetic Western canon. And there is I would say, sort of a character, potentially sort of an allegory for herself, but this character of Julia Hungry that pops up in a few of the poems in that collection. For me, I sort of saw this character archetype of Julia Hungry in the collection as this modern woman trying to contort and shape and fit herself into the space and the traditional structure that has been laid out for her, whether that be within poetry, whether that be in ideas of womanhood, but also at the same time the sense of being able to find poetry within modern existence, poetry being made of this character's day-to-day life and the pressures and expectations that arise in being a woman. So I would say that archetype character has been my favorite so far this year. Next question, books that made you cry. Now, I don't usually cry when reading books or watching movies, but I will say a book that definitely made me very emotional, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was a recent read of mine. Definitely a modern classic, a modern gothic tragic tale, and as you would likely suspect, it does not have a happy ending. It has a very tragic, wistful, longing ending that definitely makes your heart feel quite raw. Book that made you happy. A book that I brought with me on a recent trip to Budapest, Hungary that I took with my partner is a memoir called Budapest Diary in Search of the Mother Book by Susan Rubin Suleiman. This was a wonderful memoir to take with me for that trip. Now Harvard professor of French literature and culture, who was born in Budapest but had to flee with her family at the age of 10, returning to the city, becoming reacquainted with it over a long extended stay as a visiting professor at a local university there, right in the aftermath of what's called the change, the switch from the communist Soviet government to a capitalist government. Definitely a wonderful mix of memoir and reflection on Suleiman's own internal journey that she's going, but also a wonderful insight into the atmosphere and the outlook from within the city and from some of the people that were living there during that time period that had lived through the communist Soviet period and their viewpoint on the change that has occurred. Most beautiful book that you have purchased this year, that is definitely going to have to be Lot by Sheila von Reinhold. This is a recent purchase. Lord. This is a recent purchase of mine on the recommendation from M of Manuscripts in the Margins. I will leave a link to the book description down below because my battery is flashing at me. Final question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And oh, there are so many that I want to mention and list here, but for the sake of time, I will list My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I said that I wanted to read this book for my spring TBR. I have yet to get to it, hoping to get to it in the next couple of weeks here. Another recent purchase, or purchase from this year, Blackouts by Justin Torres. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I keep saying that I want to read this and I really do. I really need to read it. Another new purchase, The Plague by Albert Camus. It definitely feels like a book that would feel very poignant to read for me at the moment. And I think hopefully I can get through this without my camera dying on me, but I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts on how my reading year is going. My viewpoint on how my reading year has been going is that it's been going a little bit slower than I may have liked. I have subsequently dropped my yearly reading goal from 100 books to 70 books to now 50 books, just to sort of, shall we say, update my expectations for how many books that I plan to or think I'll be able to read this year. And in the end, reading goals do feel arbitrary, but for me, I think they've become sort of that integral goalpost or marker of how quote-unquote successful I have been as a reader, which, saying out loud, I don't believe is true for other readers, so why am I measuring myself to that expectation? It's something I think I need to check myself on. And I will say that while I have read fewer books this year than I generally have at this point in the year in the past, I feel like I have in some ways slowed down in my reading number of books, but also just the amount of time that I'm taking with books. So I'm taking more time with books. I'm slowing down. I am not trying to rush through in order to finish and sort of check off books from my reading list and get that little dopamine hit from marking them as read on Storygraph. But I think I need to close out this video, folks. My camera is really flashing at me at this point, but I would love to hear what books you have been reading so far this year. Tell me about how your reading year has been going. Feel free to answer any and or all of the questions in this tag in the comments if you so choose, if you would like to do so. But with that, folks, I definitely need to wrap this up and head out the door. I hope you are having a great day, night, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in my next video.